How PTSD Affects the Brain, a TED Talk by Peyton Johnson. First, what is PTSD? Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a trauma and stressor-related disorder as defined by the DSM-5. PTSD usually presents symptoms 6 months or later after a trauma or stressor event, and these symptoms can become debilitating. They include nightmares, intrusive thoughts. This is what we think of when we think of flashbacks. Anger issues, depression is common, hypervigilance, suicidal thoughts or actions can occur. Substance abuse is prevalent in the community of people with PTSD, and dissociation disorders are also known to be alongside PTSD. And why is this important? Well, besides the aforementioned symptoms, why is research into this disorder important? PTSD affects over 8 million individuals in the United States, and it has a significant impact on jobs and personal life. Interpersonal relationships can become stressed. Jobs, it's hard to maintain a job sometimes with anger outbursts depending on the severity of PTSD. And there's actually a significant portion of the homeless population that has PTSD that are going untreated. And this actually has long-term physiological changes in the brain. Actual brain matter decreases because of PTSD. And there's an increased activity of the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight, which putting you in that constant state of anxiety. And the current treatments for PTSD are not always effective. So what are these physiological changes to the brain? Studies have actually shown a decrease in hippocampal volume in individuals with PTSD. And if you look to the figure on my right, or the right of the screen, you can see that those black circles or those black ovals in the middle of the brain, those are called the ventricles. And the ventricles are actually not brain mass, they're empty spaces in the brain. They're used for cerebral spinal fluid production and circulation, but that's besides the point. Those are actually quote unquote empty spaces. So the brain on the right actually is the one with PTSD, and since those are bigger, they show decreased hippocampal volume, which lie right under those ventricles in the brain. And the hippocampus is the area of the brain that deals with learning and memory. And there's actually also hyperactive amygdalas in brains with PTSD, and the amygdala deals with conditioned fear responses. There's also hypoactive ventromedial prefrontal cortexes. Those are what tell the amygdala it's okay and extinguish some of those fear responses given away by the amygdala. And there's also, because of the hyperactive amygdala, hypoactivity in other areas, this is an increase in sympathetic nervous system activity. So what is the sympathetic nervous system? Well, your nervous system is broken into two main branches. One is your central nervous system, and the other is your peripheral nervous system. Your central nervous system includes your spinal cord, your brainstem, and your brain. It is like the body's master control unit. And your peripheral nervous system is everything else. And that is broken into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system tells your heart to beat, tells you to breathe, tells you to digest, your pupils to contract. It's everything that your body does without you thinking about it. It's the somatic nervous system carries sensory information from your sensory organs to your brain and relays motor movement. I'm going to pick up this coffee cup. That's somatic nervous system. The coffee burns my hand. That's hot. That is your somatic nervous system. And so your autonomic nervous system is further broken down to two branches. There's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what we refer to as your fight or flight, and this has that your heart rate is faster, your contraction force is increased. There's an increase in adrenaline in your blood, and that leads to a dilation of the bronchioles in your lungs. There's also a contraction of digestive organs, inducing, and long-term of that induces nausea, trouble with digestion, other GI problems. Your parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest. This is more of the, everything is good. We can process our food, sit down, conserve some energy, nothing is going wrong. Then your buddy jumps out behind you, sympathetic nervous system, you're scared, you turn around, you're either ready to fight or run. So that's kind of how the nervous system is actually broken down. So what is the current treatment for PTSD? There aren't great treatments currently. Psychopharmacology is the most prevalent and most successful. The most common drugs for PTSD are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. But those can actually have severe side effects. They can cause nausea even more than your contraction of your digestive organs, and they can cause even more depression, can cause suicidal thoughts or actions. The list goes on and on for the negative side effects, and some of those are actually so severe that people cannot actually take their drugs. While they're effective for some, they aren't effective for all, and they also can be expensive. This is why we see a lot of homeless people with PTSD. They can't get a job because of the severity of their symptoms, and because they don't have a job, they can't afford their medication because they don't have health insurance, and it kind of builds on itself. And the other side of it is cognitive behavioral therapy, which includes eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This makes individuals go back into the moment and try to reprocess this as they are safer. And this actually is not effective for every individual, and it can be traumatizing and too intensive. Exposure therapy is not always doesn't always work for every individual by itself, and actually making them go back to that event can actually do more harm than the good. So let's revisit the neuroconnectivity between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex has actually been shown to eliminate fear responses in the amygdala. This is good. This means when you have a hyperactive amygdala, your ventromedial prefrontal cortex is, hey, we don't need that conditioned fear response. We're okay. That stimuli is not, we are not in danger. But in PTSD brains, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is actually hypoactive, and that leads to a lack of downregulation to the rampant amygdala, and that is what induces symptoms. So it's kind of a double-edged sword here, is the amygdala is hyperactive, but the thing that controls the amygdala is hypoactive, and that can lead to those rampant symptoms. So is there any other form of treatment? Is there any other research? Actually, repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation has been shown to help individuals with PTSD. But what is RTMS? Well, repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation is sending a magnetic stimuli into the brain to either activate or deactivate areas of it. Well, that sounds kind of intense. What are the side effects? There actually are very minimal side effects with transcranial magnetic stimulation. Some of them are minor headaches, scalp irritation at the site of the coil. So it's not the awful symptoms we're seeing with other things. And there's actually been success with repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation in some studies. Some studies have actually used low frequency RTMS to try to inactivate some areas of the brain. But some of the areas that I'm looking into are using high frequency repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, and the hope is to actually activate the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and to start regulating that hyperactive amygdala. So the proposed area of activation is actually that ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And the hope is that with the upregulation of that, the amygdala will go back to being normal, and that will subside some of those symptoms. And there's actually a significant amount of research into that neural connectivity and the deactivation of the the activation of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So, in conclusion, PTSD is a very prevalent disorder. Like I said, 8 million Americans are currently diagnosed with PTSD. It has very severe symptoms, making day-to-day life very difficult. The treatment is ineffective for all patients, meaning that it doesn't work for everybody and the symptoms are still severe. And so this new neural connectivity that we found between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala opens up possible avenues for future research into that. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. If you have any questions, please email me, and I hope you learned something. Have a good day.